GDLS Canada, an industry leader dedicated to supporting our customers and the community.
Gail Cummings-Danson, Gail Cummings, I grew up as. No nickname, no lacrosse nickname. I don't know that you can make one out of Cummings. I'm 55, August 9th, 1966, and I was born in Oakville. I currently live in Clifton Park, New York, and I grew up playing lacrosse in Huntsville. You know, I don't know how I first found the game. I think my brother probably found the game first. He's 2 years older. And because he was going to play, I decided I wanted to play. And of course, there were no girls' teams. It was just boys' teams. But that was fine. And so I think when we moved to Huntsville, I was in the 3rd grade. And I think that's just what people did. So I did too. 1975, I think.
And you were a novice?
And novice, yep. I was definitely first-year novice. So playing boys box lacrosse, to me it was just lacrosse because there were no girls teams. And it just is what everybody did in Huntsville. And we moved there when I was in the 3rd grade. And my brother started playing, so I naturally joined in and started playing on a team as well. I think that, you know, it continues to be my favorite sport. Now it's lacrosse, but box lacrosse was my first love. So my teammates never treated me any differently, of course, because I'd been playing with them for so long. It was the same teammates every year, right? Small town, so you knew who your teammates were going to be. Maybe somebody new would move to town, but generally speaking, it was the same team year in and year out. So they're like my brothers. That's how I just played with them, and then I played ice hockey with them as well, the same group. I think, you know, when you would go and play against a different team, and at the time, I started out, there were 2 girls, myself and another that played on the team. And it was sort of like get those girls, you know, like goofy boys, you know, talking about what they were going to, you know, knock the girls out, those kinds of things, right? I mean, that just happens when you're younger. But I think naturally, girls start to weed themselves out. Not everybody wants to play the physicality of what box lacrosse is as you get older. And I just always loved it. And of course, I was a defense person, right? So I played defense. You know, I was the one doing most of the cross-checking instead of being cross-checked. So that worked to my advantage as well. Well, you know, it's a great question because it's actually my father that found it. I think he was horrified to learn that I was planning to play junior lacrosse. I just loved it that much, right? And I thought, there's no reason why, even though at that time, you know, you're 17 to 21-year-olds, I understand there's a difference between a 15, 16-year-old versus a 17 to 21-year-old boy, man at that point. But I was convinced that I could do it and wanted to do it and would do it in Huntsville. And I think he was horrified at that thought. And so he said, I can't give up lacrosse. And he said, well, we will find you a team to play on. Now, this is before the internet, you know, so I don't know exactly how he found the team that he did, but he researched it somehow, found that there's a team, an Ontario team, and said, here's a girls' team that you can play on if you can make it. And, you know, we live 2.5 hours away from Toronto. I was 15. I didn't have a driver's license. And he would drive me to every practice so that I could try out for this team, so that I would have an avenue to play lacrosse when my box lacrosse days were over. Well, I mean, just a great family, of course, right? And so committed to lacrosse and advancing lacrosse for girls and women. So very appreciative of that. I mean, they played, but of course they wanted it for their sisters. And the whole family was engaged in lacrosse for girls. And they made these opportunities happen in Ontario. And, you know, when I say Ontario, it was really a team based out of Toronto and drawing from all over, you know, as many as could come from the province, right? So my first meeting, I mean, I was still playing box lacrosse at the time, so it was an interesting crossover. And I remember, handing me this stick and saying, "This is the girls' stick. This is what you play with." And my first instinct was to start, like there was no pocket, so I'm punching the pocket. And they're like, "What are you doing? You can't put a pocket in there." And I said, "But how am I going to play with this? There's no pocket. The ball needs a pocket." And but I learned quickly how that was going to happen and how it was going to be really different from the box game. And so that was an eye-opener. I would say the other eye-opener was, and I remember my parents driving me to Buffalo. It was the first tournament that we were going to play in. I'd never played in a game. I'd only been at practices. And I want to say it was at the Nichols School in Buffalo, or Niagara Falls. And they handed me these uniforms, which was a skirt. And I was like, I'm not playing in a skirt. My parents just sort of chuckled and went off to get coffee and came back, and I was in the first game, and there I was playing with a skirt, like you'll do what you have to do, right? But I couldn't believe that you played in a skirt. And so that was another transition, and something that you get used to very quickly. But it was a surprise and a shock, the first uniform that was handed to me. Hadn't heard of that before. I remember Paul saying to all of us at the time, like, maybe some of us will get selected to try out. I'm like, well, that would be amazing, right? I mean, I'm 15, that would just be amazing. And I never thought about it more after that, and we just continued with our season. And then there were invitations based on what we were doing that were sent to people from different provinces. And at the time, primarily, I would say Ontario and British Columbia, but that's where most of the lacrosse was being played. And we were invited to come out to British Columbia and try out for the national team, which that in and of itself for me, at my age, was amazing. Like, I just couldn't believe that I was going to get this opportunity. And one thing I would also say is that, my transition from box lacrosse to field lacrosse, so I became an attacker in field lacrosse, primarily because I was so vastly concerned that I was going to cross-check somebody, because it was a natural instinct, right? Somebody comes down one-on-one and you're gonna cross-check them. And I knew that wasn't part of the game, but that was a transition that I had to make as well, because that natural instinct was going to kick in. And of course we weren't wearing any equipment, and I didn't want to do that to anybody. So I said, well, I'm probably better off trying to move to an attack position. So at least I'm the one going one-on-one instead of defending a one-on-one. Yeah, so I'll just go back to the tryout for a second, because as I remind myself of what that was, you're trying to remember what that experience was, because you're meeting people for the first time. They potentially could be your future teammates. They were a great group of girls for sure, but I remember because I was a goofy 15-year-old, right? Yeah. Just I remember so distinctly thinking, wow, if they showed us what our walkout uniforms were going to look like, and they had everything there for us so that we could sort of digest what could possibly be happening. And I remember thinking, oh, what must it take to earn your way onto the team to get that walkout uniform? And so goofy of a 15-year-old, like that's what I was thinking about. I've always been extrinsically motivated, but I was motivated by parts of the uniform and parts of the gear that we were going to get to be as members of the Canadian team. So now to fast forward to your question about our standing within the world as far as how they viewed Canadian women's lacrosse, they didn't give us much hope of doing anything over there. In fact, I remember anecdotally hearing, well, if you could maintain the distance by a 10 or a 12 goal gap, you'd be doing really well. Like, who's going anywhere to lose and feel that you do well by losing 10 or 12 goals? None of us, right? So I think, for us who had made the team, and none of us thought that was going to be our showing. We didn't know what to expect. but we didn't think that's what we were going to expect. So we went in there pretty, we were gritty. We were all box lacrosse players. And that set the foundation for, just a really great women's field lacrosse team, because we had strength, we were strong. There wasn't anything dainty about any of us. When Canada decided they would send a team to England for the first World Championship, I was so young at the time that I don't know that I understood what the backdrop to it was. I was just invited to try out for a team, and that's what I was going to do. Of course, I knew the Gilkinsons, and then Courtney Sollenberger was going to be the head coach, and she had been the coach at Lafayette College. So we met her at the tryout. And then Dave Evans was the head coach for the team in British Columbia. So he was at the tryouts. And by the end of the tryouts, I don't know when it was actually formed, but by the end of the tryouts, it was the three of them were the head coach, and Paul and Dave as the assistant coaches of the national team. And then there were a host of people behind the scenes doing work. But when you're a goofy teenager, you're not paying attention to the backdrop of it. Right. So those are the folks that got us over to England. So I think as the tournament went on, again, we went over and trained in England first for, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe a week or so, 10 days before the World Championship started. And then, so we were in London, and then we moved to Nottingham, England, which is where the World Cup took place. And I think we just, we were in a moment where we were just getting better with every practice. So we were still trying to gel as a team. We hadn't been around each other long enough to go in and be any kind of a powerhouse. We just knew that we had really good players on the team. Skill-wise, maybe not field lacrosse skill-wise, but skill-wise as lacrosse players, there was strength. And so as the tournament went on, and I don't even quite remember the order of games, but as the tournament went on, we were just getting better and better. And I think when we beat Scotland, everybody was shocked. But England was going to be the real test, apparently. And because everyone anticipated it would be a U.S.-England final. And when that didn't happen, and then we ended up beating England as well, I think then we became more confident in what we could do, and we just felt like we belonged. Yeah. And we weren't out of place, as people suspected we might be initially. Right, I don't even know how or why that would happen. That would never happen today, right? Mm. And yet, so I remember in the moment being disappointed that we weren't walking away with something. It didn't change the accomplishment that we had won bronze. We knew we had won bronze, even though there wasn't a medal to show for it. Yeah. And then I remember, again, my age is part of this, right? I remember afterwards being disappointed that we didn't get something, but we knew we were going to settle in to watch the gold medal game as well. Okay. And we walked across the street, got fish and chips, like the things that you remember, right? Came back to the stadium where the games were being played and watched the gold medal game while eating fish and chips. And that's what I remember. And I remember being so intrigued because this is so ridiculous when I think back now, but like it was wrapped in newspaper. It was like real, yes. Like newspaper print kind of stuff. And and we knew what we had won. We knew that we had done really well. Would we have wanted medals? Of course we would have, right? It's what you would expect. Did it change our thinking, or did we somehow feel like we hadn't accomplished what we had? Not one bit, is what I would say, yeah. So when I was over there, it was so interesting because the women who were on the U.S. national team, many of them were college coaches themselves. Had either just finished college or were already coaching in college. And I think just based on my youth, several of them said to me, would you ever think about going to the United States? For what? Why would I do that? Oh, you could play lacrosse down there. I grew up in a small town. I mean, yes, I was going to go to college, but that playing in the U.S., playing a sport, that wasn't anything that I was planning for or thinking about. I was playing in the moment. And so as they started to talk to me more about the potential of an opportunity, I'm like, how does that work? How would I do that? And they're like, oh, well, if you got a scholarship, what's a scholarship? Well, some schools will pay you and help pay for some of your expenses to come down to play on their team. I'd never even heard of it. And so, that sounded like that would be a great idea and a great opportunity. And so I didn't even know which teams were good, quite frankly, because I was just getting into the women's game. It wasn't research that I had done or could do. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have computers. So I don't know where I would have learned about that, right? Now it just seems so simple. Oh, we'll look it up. There was no just look it up back then. And so, yeah, they talked to me a little bit about that. And when I got back home, because my parents didn't even fly, they didn't fly to the World Championship with me. They just sort of sent me off as a then 16-year-old by the time the games took place, and said, yeah, good luck, have a great experience. We'll see you when you get back. So when I came back, I had all kinds of stories to talk about, right? Which was fantastic, but that was one of them, was, maybe extending my education in the United States might be an opportunity for me, and I would still be able to play lacrosse, which was just cherry on the cake, if you will. Yeah, so it's very interesting, that story, because I wanted to be a physical education major. So I thought, well, if I was going to come down to the United States, I want to major in my plan was to come back to Canada and be a physical education teacher. I love the idea that I could maybe wear sweats to work every day. That was just going to be something really appealing to me since the third grade. And so when I was in England, I asked some of the people around off the US team, well, who are the good teams in the United States? Ironically, the athletic trainer for the US national team was from Temple University. And she said, Temple University. And I said, well, okay, where is that? That's in Philadelphia, okay. So what else? Who else is good? And so my parents, they drove me everywhere, right? They were so supportive. They drove down, and we went from campus to campus just to check things out, to see what campus I felt good at or what made sense. I didn't even know, I didn't know what the recruitment process was. I sort of fell on Temple's lap. I would go in and just walk up to the door, knock on the door, and want to talk to the lacrosse coach. And a few of them had heard of me just because there was a natural, I guess, conversation that there was such a young player playing in the World Championship. But even then, not really. I mean, not really. And I went in and met with the lacrosse coach at Temple, Tina Sloan Green. And she, it was random. My parents dropped me off on Broad Street and said, I think that's where her office is. Why don't you run in there? And I ran in on my own, knocked on the door, and she said, come on in. And we sat down and had a conversation. And that's how that happened. And Tina is a legend. And I didn't know that. I just knew that this person had told me Temple was really good. And they had just won the AIAW at the time championship, I think in '82. And so I'm like, well, they must be pretty good. Okay, so that's how that happened. And it's, you take advantage of the opportunities that come your way is what I think you do. I was so blessed for my experience at Temple University. It afforded me so many opportunities, for Tina Sloan Green to take a chance on, at the time, the first Canadian to come across, why would she do that? There was so many great players in the United States, right? But Tina she's that person. who would take, it's all about risk and reward. Let me take a chance over here. And so I'm so appreciative of the opportunity, because nobody else really had done that before. And so she invited me in, and I, the coaching staff there, Sue Stahl, who ended up being the national coach for the United States, so lucky to work with both of them. So you go in, the year before I arrived, Temple had won the '84 national championship. Now it was an NCAA sport, not an AIAW. And so they had won, and of course I was thinking, well, if I'm gonna go all the way to the United States to play, I might as well try and play on the very best team I can, and that was Temple. So that's how I landed there, so fortunate. And I grew up in a small town, right? So living in a city really was appealing to me. I'd never done that. Seemed like that would be an unbelievable opportunity as well. And when I say Temple is right in the heart of Philly, I mean, it's right downtown. So it was fantastic. I loved my experience there. We get into our season, and my time at Temple over 4 years, we were so fortunate to make it to the Final Four all 4 years. I think the first year my freshman year, we were undefeated going into the Final Four. And then we lost our first game in the semifinals. Shocking. I think our whole team was shocked. And so that motivated the next year and the next year and the next year. And it wasn't until my senior year that we actually got the monkey off the back and won the darn thing. My junior year, we were in the championship game, but both freshman and sophomore years, we lost in the semifinals. Lost in my junior year, and then finally won it my senior year. And it was just an unbelievable experience. And it reminds me of just how difficult it is to win. I mean, I think going into it my freshman year, we were so good. Our team was so good. It was almost like, for me, okay, well, we'll win this. And when we didn't, I was shocked. It was expected. But you learn tough lessons with losses. And those were tough losses. So to finally win it my senior year was like, this was, sort of full circle moment to say, we have finally done what we set out set out what we wanted to do. So I was thankful for that as well. But I had great teammates, unbelievable teammates. And so, yes, I was a 3-time All-American. But it's because my teammates made me look so good, right? They fed me the ball that allowed me to put it in the cage, and I, will always be grateful for them. But it's not lost on me that you need a team around you for anyone to shine. So I didn't know at the time that I was the first to have gone down to the United States on a scholarship. I was very fortunate to go on a full ride. That was life-changing for me, right? Clearly life-changing because of how things have changed and where I've ended up. But to consider myself like as having been the first to do that, as I said, I didn't know at the time, but I'm so glad it happened because the lacrosse that's played up north, so in Canada, there's great lacrosse players up in Canada. And I think, for the U.S. coaches, now it's not even, it's just natural that they look in Canada for great lacrosse players. And so I'm glad that door was opened, because it had been opened on the boys' side, on the men's side. Before me, several Canadian men had gone down and played in the United States. It just was unheard of on the women's side. And now you don't even give it a second thought. And so that's great. It's about opportunities. And it's about opportunities to continue to play this great sport. So whether it's in Canada, whether it's the United States, the fact that you get to play and get to continue to play, it to me is the most important part. In a game, I don't think so. In practice, yes. And again, as I think about the transition of women's lacrosse now, I mean, you see it all the time, which is awesome. The sticks are developed differently, right? Not so easy to do with a wooden stick, is what I would say, but also with less of a pocket. And over time, the pocket has grown a little bit, and the technology of the stick has become so much better that a behind the back shot it's always going to be a difficult shot, but you can see them, and you can see great athletes now pulling that move off, and then some, with the help of the technology of the stick. So I don't think I ever scored one in a game, but just in practice. Yeah. When I graduated from Temple, I thought my goal was to come back to Canada, as I said earlier, and I was going to be a phys ed teacher. That was what I was going to do. And then it wasn't until my senior year at Temple where it occurred to me that there were people behind the scenes running athletics. Prior to that, I mean, we had games, we had buses show up, we had officials show up. I didn't know how all that happened. I never gave it even a second thought. It just happened and we played. But it wasn't until my senior year that I could sort of appreciate more that there were folks working behind the scenes, not just our coaches, but administrators. I didn't even know that that's what you called them, but administrators who were working behind the scenes, making all this happen for all of the teams in the college setting. I'm like, I wonder how you do that. I might like to do that. And so I stayed at Temple after my bachelor's degree and worked on my master's degree in that field, in sports management, with the hope that I could somehow maybe coach and be an administrator somewhere. And then after doing that for 1 year, I landed my first job at Connecticut College as the women's lacrosse coach and assistant athletic director. 2 birds with 1 stone. How great is that? I mean, again, an opportunity that fell on my lap because I think of my lacrosse experience. Nobody just graduating gets that opportunity, and so I wanted to take full advantage of that. That became the challenge then that was the year of the 1989, so we were going over to Australia for the World Championship. We competed, we finished 4th. To me, that was disappointing. I was expecting us to do better than that, but still, it was a great experience. And then became the challenge of what was I going to do next. I was not ready to stop playing lacrosse, but the thought of working in the United States and then trying to get home for national team practices and things like that was daunting. I didn't know how that was going to work. Most of our practices at the time were happening in British Columbia, so that became a process to try and work through how could I navigate that travel, still keep my job. You know, I wasn't ready to give up lacrosse, but I also wanted to start a career. So just trying to juggle all of that meant that I had to start thinking about some different options. I did. I had to. Once I'd made up my mind that I was going to try and continue to play lacrosse in the United States, if I wanted to play at the highest level and be back at the World Championship, I was going to have to become a U.S. citizen. And so I did make that transition as well. So we won the World Championship with the U.S., or I was part of the 1993 U.S. national team that won the World Championship.
Okay.
They didn't to me. If they did, I'm sure there were. I'm sure people had an opinion about that and thoughts about that, and I understand that. But nobody said to me that they were disappointed. Why would you leave Canada to transition to the U.S. national team? Nobody ever said that to me, but I'm sure people thought it for sure. Yeah, so life takes an interesting turn for sure, right? So I got married in 1989. My husband is American. He was from Philly. He played baseball at Temple, and that's where we met. And then we moved to Connecticut in 1989, and so that I could take the job as the head women's lacrosse coach and assistant athletic director at Connecticut College. A year after that, so now post, and this also led to part of my decision around continuing to play and wanting to play then for the United States. After 1 year at Connecticut College, the assistant athletic director position at Temple University opened up. No coaching involved, just purely administration. And that was intriguing. It was sort of coming back home for him, but also for me. I'd spent so much time in Philadelphia. My friends were all there. The teams that the Philadelphia teams that I was a part of were, the training would be easy. I would be right in the city. And so I took the job as the assistant athletic director at Temple University. And I was there for 4 years. Yeah, 4 years. And all the while, that's when I continued to play for Philly club teams. I started training with the U.S. national team while I was in transition to take on U.S. citizenship. And then by the time the World Championship came around for '93, I had gained my U.S. citizenship and started, continued to play and earned an opportunity to play on the national team. While all of that was happening, I was still able to work as the assistant athletic director at Temple University. So they were flexible with me, so appreciative of that, allowing me to leave to go to training camps and things like that. And so I was there for 4 years. After the '93 World Championship, I retired from playing lacrosse. My knees had reached its maximum at that point. My knees had a lot of pain in them, and then an opportunity came my way to leave Temple University and become the head women's lacrosse coach and associate athletic director at the University at Albany. And the University at Albany was going to transition from Division III to 2 to 1. That was their goal. And compliance-wise, I was going to take them through that transition. So I accepted that position, coached at the University at Albany for 2 years before the administrative duties just became so much that I couldn't continue coaching. And then I was at the University at Albany for 12 and a half years. And then an opportunity to be the athletic director at Skidmore College, which is where I am now, became available. And so I was fortunate to receive that opportunity and be asked to join that community. And that's where I've been ever since. And I'm in my 17th year there now. I might have to come out of retirement for the Olympics. I don't know if my knees could take it, but I always thought that if lacrosse became an Olympic sport when I was younger, that I would have to come out of retirement to try for that. Like that was, who doesn't want to be an Olympian, right? I'm so excited that it's finally being part of the conversation because it's such a great game. But jokingly, yeah, I think I'll stay in retirement. Yeah, so I haven't actually seen the new game of 6 played yet. I haven't witnessed it, but I'm a purist, so I'm always going to be deep rooted in my box lacrosse experience, and that's what I'll always think of as lacrosse. Even though I transitioned into field lacrosse, and I love the field lacrosse game, so to see that there's another transition happening so that it can potentially be part of the Olympics. While I understand that, I don't know why it needs to be changed because the game as it is now, full field, the way it's played everywhere, is an exciting game. So I'm not sure why we need to change it, but if that's what it takes to be part of the Olympics, I can roll with that as well. And I'm sure it will. It's a fantastic game to watch because once you're watching the skill of lacrosse being played, it really doesn't matter what the rules and the regulations are, as long as you're watching the great game of lacrosse. Lacrosse will always be lacrosse. Like I said, a box is just a great game. I mean, it's in a confined space. I never played on a girls' box lacrosse team, so I don't know what that experience would be. I can't imagine it would be any different than when I played ice hockey. I think that you could draw parallels. So why wouldn't a women's box lacrosse world women's box lacrosse team work? I think it would, in the same way that ice hockey works. I would draw the parallels there. So I hope that happens. It's again, it's a different game than field lacrosse, but in the end, it's still lacrosse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have so appreciated my experience with lacrosse and continue to experience lacrosse. So I would say, even though I'm no longer playing or coaching as an administrator, I want the experiences that I have had playing sport, and in particular lacrosse, for all of the athletes that I work with now at the college level. And I want our coaches to be able to experience that along with me. I mean, the life lessons that you learn from playing sport are so sort of transcending and lifelong, and they are life lessons. They're not just about sport, right? They're lessons that you can carry through with whatever your career choice is, and so I wish for everybody that they could find a sport that they love as much as I love lacrosse, because with that comes opportunity, with that comes lessons learned. Some of the greatest lessons I've learned over time have come in losses, come from losses, and yes, I've been fortunate to be selected to several Hall of Fames. That's not lost on me, but those are also individual accomplishments that I'd be the first to say don't happen without great teammates, without great coaches. I mean, I grew up in Huntsville. There's no better place to learn lacrosse than Huntsville. I mean, when you think of the quality of coaches that I had, starting with my father, who coached me in every sport, but in Huntsville, I mean, I played with Jack Bionda's sons. His older sons coached me. Jim Higgins was my midget coach. That's where you learn lacrosse, quality lacrosse. And because of all of those experiences, and then my transition to field lacrosse, to be coached by Paul Gilkinson and Courtney Sollenberger, and then Tina Sloan Green, Carol Patterson, Sue Stahl, because of those experiences and because of great teammates, some of who you've already spoken with, those members of the Canadian national team, and then my time with the U.S. national team, those are the people that help you achieve sort of individual distinction, but what matters most to me is the team distinctions. I appreciate that I'm in these Hall of Fames for things that I was able to do, but I would not have been able to do those things without great teammates and great coaches, and so I'm very appreciative of all of that.